So, Brian, thank you very much for joining me today. I want you to kick us off by just telling everybody at home a brief bit about what Dandelion Void actually is.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to ask me some of these questions. Dandelion Void is a sci-fi survival crafting game with multiplayer. It's set aboard a derelict interstellar ark that's become overgrown with vicious plant life.
Okay, fabulous. So now that we know a bit about the game itself, what is your role at Manzanita Interactive?
Yeah, so I'm, Brian Ostrander, game director. So my job is to sort of keep the vision of the game moving forward. I started off this project basically doing a little bit of everything because it was a side project. But now I'm doing a lot of concepting, a lot of production work, as well as some coding. And I'm joined by 5 other members of Manzanita Interactive. Robin, who's gameplay programmer, Roland, who's working on our networking, Dara, who's our artist, animator, rigger extraordinaire, our composer, Katten, and our sound designer, Frenchie.
Brilliant. So it sounds like you have a nice tight-knit team at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sure we have a fair few Project Zomboid fans that are going to be watching this video, and I hear that you were quite involved with the modding scene for Project Zomboid once upon a time. I'd be eager to hear about that and any other background that you have in the games industry as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good place to start with modding, either Project Zomboid or games in general, because that is how I got my start in the industry. Is probably the first modding I ever did, or creative work at all in games, would have been, as a kid making custom maps for StarCraft 1. I remember being a little bit frustrated with the quality of some of the maps I was playing in multiplayer in that game. People were doing things like spelling out their initials and crystals and in center of the play area. Well, I appreciate that, it can be a reflection of whatever you want, these modding tools, and it's fun to have fun and learn how they work. I was very interested in more realistic maps, or maps that told stories through some kind of environmental story. I mean, I was like, pretty young at this point. I must have been like 8 or something. And so like, I didn't have the word environmental storytelling in my head. I didn't know about, the Fallout, skeletons that were found on toilets, like that was something I would learn about later.
Fallout is an amazing example of environmental storytelling, especially Fallout New Vegas, I think, is a great example of that.
It's an awesome one. Yeah. So I did it, messed around a little bit with the map editor and that, and then really found my footing with Gary's Mod. Started it back when it was called Gary's Mod 9 before it was released for sale, and worked on it. Various like roleplay maps were something that were really interesting to me, little desert theme maps or city theme maps, and sort of fell into just realizing like, wow, yeah, like game dev is for me. So I was born and raised in New York City and worked in the industry there, which was a lot of like mobile gaming sort of stuff at the time, and then worked in VR for a while, which brought me out to California. I'm now in sunny Southern California. Did a stint in educational gaming as well, or would call serious gaming in the industry, sort of simulationist stuff, or learning stuff. And just as it's funny, like I got Project Zomboid back when it was for sale on Desura, I think. Played it, it was cute. Like I was definitely going through a big zombie phase. Loved Shaun of the Dead. I think I saw that, multiple times in theaters and really enjoyed that, as well as like Dawn of the Dead and stuff.
Yeah.
Didn't think of much of it for a number of years, and then around like 2020 or so, was like, I wonder what's going on with Zomboid, wonder if that's still kicking, and found it very much is still kicking, and it is like an entirely different game than what I remembered. And I got super sucked into it. Loved the simulationist aspect. I particularly liked how it was simulationist about some of the more, mundane things about survival, not just like, the guns are very detailed and very interesting, but also just like the cooking system. It's really cool. So I found myself wanting more late game content, because you can, maybe it takes, at least it took me, I think 80 hours to really get an understanding of how to survive more than just a week or two. And once you get to the late game, I did find myself wanting more. I had this sort of theory of like, well, Zomboid is good because it takes things you take for granted in a survival game and just takes them away from you. So I found that the emergency broadcast system, which does weather alerts and helicopter alerts, it's like the only other player, because this was a time too when it was like pre-multiplayer for build 42, I think. So it's pretty lonely. And I found the daily ritual of the emergency broadcast system, listening in and getting an idea of what the weather was going to be like the next day. It was like a lifeline in a game that's pretty solitary otherwise. And so it's like, all right, well, Zomboid players are kind of sickos, myself included. Let's make it harder. Let's say that this nice thing that I have, let's take it away. Let's make me work for it. And so that's how I got into Save Our Station. I wanted to provide a physical location that these broadcast stations basically lived at, just communications hardware that you had to repair that would fail over time, that you'd have to use found artifacts to diagnose and locate the problems and places to fix the weather station. I'll be honest, I was a little bit surprised by how much people liked it. Or maybe it was really just a reflection of like, maybe we're all a little bit the same when it comes to Project Zomboid, where it's like, oh, a knob to turn up the difficulty? Yes, please, let's add that.
Yeah, and I think you should be proud of things like that because, like, I remember playing Save Our Station back on build 41 briefly, and it was an amazingly made mod. And you're right, it is such a lifeline for players that when you take that away, it can add some challenge to people's playthroughs that may have not experienced real challenge for quite some time because they're so comfortable with the game by that point. So I think it had a real draw for a lot of players, myself included.
Yeah, I think anything that gets you out of your base in the late game is how you create more interesting stories to tell in Zomboid.
So how did you go from getting into Project Zomboid to then transitioning into making your own game? Why did you decide to create Dandelion Void? And if you could tell us something about the challenges you faced along the way, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges, and one that's probably felt by a lot of game workers in our industry right now, is I got laid off in 2023, pretty early on in the wave of game workers, getting laid off and companies being consumed by private equity and sort of chewed up. What I thought was a pretty stable educational games company job in Los Angeles. Me and a lot of my coworkers, I think over 100, were laid off from that company. I found myself reflecting on how much I enjoyed working on Save Our Station and how I wanted working on a game to feel like modding and to be like adding like fun new stuff to a systems game. And I really respected the kind of vision that the Project Zomboid team had for their game. But I'm a sci-fi boy at heart, just love space. I have dabbled in some side projects that play with this idea of a generation ship, basically a starship that takes hundreds of years to cross the star. There's no cryo sleep, there's no life extension or anything. It's just people living and dying in the void between the stars until their descendants get to the destination. I just think that's a really interesting story that we don't get told a lot, just because fast and light travel is just a very convenient plot device. But if you take that away, almost like you take away the reliability of the weather service in Zomboid, I think you get interesting stories. So that's how I got into working on Dandelion Void, particularly inspired by this novel called Nonstop, which is about a character that is in this strange ship, and he doesn't realize it's a ship. He has no concept of Earth. And I just found that very interesting. I was like, I want to drop a player into a situation like that.
Absolutely. And I think this is a really good opportunity for me to ask you a bit more about the setting itself behind Dandelion Void, because as you've explained, this game isn't set in the typical landscape of something in the survival genre. So what can you tell us about the ship itself?
Yeah, so it's really its own closed ecosystem. It's meant to be a collection of modules around this propulsion hub that's pushing it towards its unknown destination. I like to think of each of the modules hanging off of this spaceship as their own little town, basically. It's home to maybe hundreds or thousands of people. And it was built and launched in the late 70s from Earth that was going through a lot of strife. It's set in an alternate timeline that wrestles with a lot of issues that I feel are very interesting right now. Because when I was growing up, as I mentioned, really into sci-fi, really into space. You know, there's beauty in sort of the strides we're making and the progress we're making with space exploration these days, but I also see a lot of privatization of it that concerns me, and I see it reflected in my own sort of experience as a game worker, where profit motives overriding what's important for the customers and the workers, sort of causing everything to get kind of worse. The enshittification. You know, there's a story I want to tell about. Yeah, well, what does the enshittification of space travel look like, and the tension that that creates in society, especially when we need so much focus on problems on Earth, and yet we have people that want to run away to the stars, take the resources with them.
And the space vessel itself is called the Pergola. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, pergola. Yeah, it's Italian for what those plants hang off of. Those like
Yes.
sort of wooden structures in a backyard. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought it was cute.
And speaking of plants, it is completely overwhelmed, or at least the module that I got to play in not too long ago was called Virgo, I believe. And that module in particular was completely overrun with sentient plant life that essentially wanted to kill the player.
Yes, something has happened. I think some stuff we'll have to wait for players like yourself to discover in the course of play. But yeah, something has gone awry with the once sort of life-giving hydroponic plants in the ship, which is why we call them the ponics, these forests of vegetation. And many of them are quite mobile, and they are after the player. I think, again, that's another one, sort of we've had like botanists and stuff join the Discord and sort of theorize about what would drive a plant to crave, human. And I think that's something we want to develop as we work on the game. Leave that to be a little ribbon for the player to pull on.
Interesting. Okay, look forward to digging into that. So a bit of a follow-up then. Aside from the pergola itself, what do you think makes Dandelion Void so special?
I think what makes Dandelion Void special is that we are making a hardcore survival experience that we've seen in a lot of different games in the past for a wider audience that, maybe hasn't played a game like this before, and putting it in a setting that's really unique. As I mentioned earlier, like generation ships are pretty underexplored as a setting in video games and in sci-fi in general. It's very hard to write stories about people that are just sort of sitting around waiting to get to their destination. And it's part of why we have, some drama along the way in the form of, these plant infestations. I think a lot of survival games also focus on the lower parts of, Maslow's hierarchy, the shelter, the food and stuff. And I think Dandelion Void, one thing I've been really happy about is how much people have taken a liking to our comfort system and kind of what that can encourage in terms of gameplay and storytelling. Where, in Dandelion Void, yes, it's going to be a very difficult game, very hard to survive, get to a place where you are, stable with your food and water and shelter and clothing and all that. But I would love to work our way up that hierarchy, and also have the player concerned with things like, their boredom, the comfort of their environment. I was particularly inspired by how Valheim has their comfort system where you can warm up by a fire. It reminds me a lot of the feeling I had like tuning into the emergency broadcast system in Zomboid, and just that comfort that I felt. I think that's a really important, I like to call it like, peanut butter and chocolate. Like, they're good separate, but together they're particularly good, better even. I'm not even a huge peanut butter fan necessarily, which is a hot take, I know. But if you combine peanut butter with chocolate, it's very good. And I think the same is true of the heart-pounding combat sections of Dandelion Void and the domestic bliss sections where you are locked in for the night. The ship's lights have gone off. There's lots of creatures scuttering around. Maybe there's something trying to scratch away at a barricade outside, but you are rearranging your furniture. You're going through your loot of the day, seeing what stuff you were able to scavenge, what knickknacks, unidentified artifacts, because you're a descendant of this very technologically advanced crew, but you didn't grow up getting trained on how to operate this ship. You are almost like a hunter-gatherer level sort of understanding of this ship and navigating among its just bizarre mechanical contraptions.
Yeah, sure. And it's interesting to me that you mentioned like the the contrast of the intense combat and then the day-to-day management of like your survival needs. I think there's a really, really strong formula that Project Zomboid has, but I love that you guys are bringing a comfort system to the game, because I feel personally, and obviously this is my personal opinion, I do feel personally that Project Zomboid is lacking in a comfort system when it has so many features like boredom and discomfort. It would be nice to see a positive side to that can provide you with some sort of buff. So I was really, really pleased to see that when I played the game and I was making this little makeshift shelter, that my character was actually starting to feel the effects of that in a positive way. So it's nice to see.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed that. Yeah, I think for us, that's one we're paying a lot of attention to. I mean, and that reflects in our priorities. Like the first musical sort of track we really started working on with our composer Catton was that comfort music that plays when you start to clean up your little hovel and make it more cozy. And I think he did a really good job of that. It's really exciting to see, and I'd love to grow that system some more, because and I'd like to encourage that kind of gameplay with players as well by rewarding them for making their space comfortable. I think there's a lot of players. I think in a previous conversation I had with you, I don't know if you used a word, or at least how I remembered it was safe house mom.
Yes. Yep.
Identifying as, I feel that strongly too. I'm also the safe house mom. I like, obviously safe house dads can cook a killer meal as well, but I like
Hell yeah.
I like being the safe house guardian and having a nice meal that people return home to in these multiplayer Zomboid sessions, and create a contrast for the intensity of leaving your safe house. I think having a bit of both makes each better, because you can feel that difference when you step from one to the other.
Absolutely. They complement each other. And I will say that I'm definitely a safe house mum, and I'm also that person that goes through the crates on the storage of your teammates, sorting them all into the proper place, because nobody follows the system that you set up. But, that's
we have a system.
Exactly. We have a system, but nobody's following it. Anyway, putting that to one side for a moment. Is Dandelion Void going to be an entirely single-player experience, or can we expect some form of multiplayer to be included?
Oh, there's multiplayer. We're working on it right now. I would say, survival games are so interesting because the single player is a really important part of any survival game. And I think you see that even when you're playing multiplayer and you get separated from your group, either intentionally or even better, not intentionally. One thing I'd really like to add in the Pergola that's not present in other games is the ability to fall through a broken floor and be on another subsection, and just force you to be separated from your group. Again, it's taking you out of that zone of comfort and enhancing that sort of feeling of, oh, I really need to survive. And so with sure, what I'm getting at is, we have multiplayer, we have single player. I would not say that we're favoring sort of one over the other, because I think they, again, feed into each other and enhance each other. If you have a good single player experience, then you have good stories to tell your fellow players in multiplayer when you go off exploring on your own. And it also allows you to just, if you want to be that lone wolf and role play that kind of experience, I think that's really valid as well.
Sure. And I mean, being alone in the vastness of space, really, really takes on a special effect. So I can understand why single player would be a focus. I do just want to ask one very quick follow-up question. I'm sure I know the answer already. I'm assuming that the multiplayer for the game is more intended to be a co-op PvE kind of experience and not so much focus on PvP?
Yeah, I mean, so PvP would be allowed. We're not forbidding anyone from, taking a stick and hitting other people. I would say we'll definitely provide server options to sort of toggle that on or off to the player's preference. To bring it back to Zomboid briefly, I think one of my favorite experiences was when multiplayer first dropped, joining a multiplayer session and the world felt dangerous again, and everyone was kind of really chill and nice to each other in it, because everyone was just like, it's really hard to survive in a game where you aren't in control of maybe the world settings and you don't know exactly are there sprinters on this server or not. And so I remember 2 cars passing, and I had almost flashback PTSD from playing Daisy and all right, this guy's gonna run me off the road. And we both just stopped, got out of our cars, and just shared details on like, oh, there's a horde of zombies a mile up the road. You're going to want to take the first left you see to avoid them. And then I told them, oh, there's some loot in the supermarket I stashed in the dumpster out back that's full of some food. It's going to go bad anyways. You should grab it. I love that. That was so cool.
Yeah,
And I would
absolutely.
love to, again, part of the survival experience. I think it's fun to be hunted by another player, but I also think that cooperative element's really quite interesting. It's funny. I'm working on this sort of like a fallen world kind of game, but I'm an optimist at heart. I actually think people are quite collaborative, and that in disasters we do see a lot of people coming together, and I'd like to find a way to encourage that in our own survival game.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So we talked a little bit about like the single player, how that's going to be a big focus. Is there going to be a story attached to the game at all, or is this more of like an open sandbox experience that the player can explore on their own terms?
Very much an open world sandbox to explore sort of at their own pace. I think, I talk a lot about the lore and the setting, and that is really important. I think it's a really important draw for players. But I do want to emphasize, this is a game you drop in and you're exploring, and there's a really, solid sort of core survival crafting loop that we're working towards, and that the story elements are told through environmental storytelling, through something that we really are excited about is we're going to have a lot of readable literature and flyers and whatnot that help build out the world. For some players, I think that's going to be a really exciting part of their day, is like picking up, finding the various books that they've gotten along the way while scavenging, and then poring over them at night. I think that's a loop that we'd be really interested in exploring, especially since like there is this big question of what happened to the ship exactly, how did it get here, and why were the people leaving Earth at all? I think those are questions that people are going to want to ask.
Yes, and it's funny you mentioned books and readable literature, because I distinctly remember from my experience with the early pre-alpha version I played was that it wasn't just books. There were also terminals that you could interface with, and often you'd be able to figure out how to unlock certain doors or turn on lights in an area, but also there were little diary entries on those terminals.
Yeah, the terminals, it's funny. That was a system like I worked on while it was a side project. And like it's sort of like I was just going wild and working on whatever I wanted to work on. And I'm really glad I got time to work on that, because a system like that is sometimes harder to justify later in development when you're looking at all the things you could do. But I think it's a really interesting place for growth, for storytelling, because I like how Fallout has terminals. But the sicko in me is like, let's just make it a little harder. I don't want someone to have to learn how to program or entirely use a terminal, but I want you to have to at least stumble through it a little bit. Maybe have a fellow, player on a multiplayer server just help you sort of nudge you along on how to access this stuff. I think if you treat the player without like sort of kitty gloves, because they're doing challenging things, they actually feel smart. It's like, I love the way that the game Duskers was a really big inspiration for our terminal system. You're stumbling through the void, exploring these derelicts, controlling these little Roomba-like creatures or robots with a little command line, and it adds a lot of tension. When you're struggling to close a door before some unknown creature comes through it, and you're like, oh my god, I'm not, like, my fingers are like are enemies against me as I'm trying to type the close door command. I think that creates really interesting tension. I think Lethal Company does a really good job of that too, bringing that to a multiplayer experience. There's a lot of comedy unintentionally to be had in a horror game by just making something a little bit harder than it normally is in another game. So the terminal is really inspired by that and the storytelling opportunities that we already see in games like Fallout.
I think another game as well, that one it reminded me of definitely was a game called GTFO.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
that one's hard. That's a hard game.
Very difficult game. But I remember playing that with a few friends, and I distinctly remember the experience of being on a terminal trying to work out the commands to open the door in front of us while my three teammates were fighting for their lives behind me, trying to stop these alien creatures from reaching me. And I think seeing that command typing sort of thing in Dandelion Void was just a really standout experience to me. And I look forward to seeing if that grows any further.
I'm excited to. I actually recently saw someone added a mod to Zomboid, adding functionality to the computers, and I'm like, the people
Ah,
crave this. It's part of the survival fantasy, and I think it's particularly with the Pergola, the setting of Dandelion Void. I think we're really looking for opportunities. Like, people are coming to this game because its setting is so different, and there's a
mhm.
new fantasy to be had. I think there's a little bit of the wilderness survivability because or survival fantasy, because there it is overrun with plants, but you're in this strange sci-fi setting, and just like crossing a river or building a stone structure in a sort of more primitive survival game provides a challenge for player. Like, accessing the terminal is like one of those elements of nature
Sure, sure.
that's in Dandelion Void, and how do you use that? And I think it's perfectly appropriate if people come to our game, and the terminal feels like a little bit weird at first, because it's weird to your character in the game as well. I think it's
Yeah.
good role playing.
Yeah,
And
it's
it
a
allows also specialization in multiplayer. You can have your
mm.
hacker guy, and then if he falls through the floor and you've got to be the one to open the door, creates these fun moments of tension.
Yes, and that's actually, to be fair, that's something I should have maybe put on my questions list here that I haven't talked about, is the customization of the character. So you will actually get the chance to build a character with like different strengths and weaknesses. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah. Any game with a like trait system or point by trait system, I'm a real fan of, because I think that's when role play starts, is when you're visualizing what your character is. And I like how Zomboid actually takes stuff like that from other games, but makes it more granular and more specific. Like, the smoker trait has got to be probably one of the most brilliant traits I've seen in a game, because even in its sort of more just fluffy roleplay element, it just adds so much fun to the game. I remember I was playing with my brother and some of his friends a session of Zomboid, and we accidentally all took the smoker trait, and we only found one lighter. And so half the gameplay was just trying to remember who the hell had the lighter, until we realized we left it in the parking lot. So I think bringing that energy to Dandelion Void, we're interested in a lot of stuff like that, that like makes your character, like, I'd love it if people pick bad traits for their character, because it creates more
Mm,
interesting stories. Like, we have this trait that's like I think like sensitive stomach. I like that in our playtests already. We've had people like, oh my god, like, I've got a sensitive stomach. I can now play a character that's like, got to be careful what they eat. I mean, that's sort of, for that person, that means a lot. Maybe not for everyone else, but we'd like to have stuff that represents different people.
yeah.
I'd love to add different, obviously, like short-sightedness or long-sightedness, or maybe someone needs to. I mean, there's just so many places you can go with these little traits, and then
100%. Yeah. And people
and
love
and
the
letting
relatability about it as well, don't they? So,
yeah, 100%. It just makes you connect with your character, and it makes it so that when you do, it also allows you to, as you receive challenges in the game that interact with your traits you've selected, it makes you feel more like well, there's only food that upsets my stomach here. I guess I got to eat it. And that creates more interesting stories, because now you threw up and you're dehydrated. And so you got to go out on a
sure.
mission to refill your water.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's stories like that that we play survival games for at the end of the day. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't want to draw too many comparisons from Project Zomboid, but I do think it's very difficult to do so with your background in modding for the game and also the inspiration behind Dandelion Void. So we see a similar system to Zomboid's moodles in Dandelion Void. What can you tell me about those specifically?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think all art is sort of built off of other art. I mean,
Yeah,
we definitely draw a lot of inspiration from Project Zomboid, and Project Zomboid draws a lot of inspiration from basically every Romero movie. So I think
hmm.
it's we're all in good company as artists, and I appreciate actually how friendly the Project Zomboid devs have been on their own subreddit whenever our game gets mentioned. They're very, I think, as fellow survival game players, they're excited to see new takes on the genre. But the Moodle specifically, I do think is quite genius sort of system that they've done, and you see it sort of in The Sims as well and a few other games. But bringing it to a survival game and making it not a linear bar, I think, is brilliant for a number of reasons. Biggest one is that as a player, I can sometimes slip into sort of a min maxi mode where I'm like, I want to fully optimize my gameplay, and having a Moodle that only shows you when a need is like more urgent rather than just a timer that ticks down, I think is a great way to just keep the player focused on what's fun in the game and not have them just nursing a bar. But we want to also expand that to explore more of the comfort sort of systems that we're building out. So a new one in our game is the comfort moodle, which increases as you clean up your environment and decorate with furniture that you found. All of our furniture is going to have different point values on how much comfort they provide, and that does have a mechanical benefit for if you're sleeping on them, but even just being around them. And that's something we also want the trait system to play with. Is that maybe someone might be a little bit more of a gremlin and not mind dilapidated furniture, or maybe someone is more bookish and feels a little less comfortable if they don't have access to some books nearby. And so the Moodle system, I think, is just brilliant because it's could be at the top of your screen, just shows you just what your character cares about at the moment and hide anything that is satiated or unimportant to your character.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely. So we've seen some limited gameplay footage of Dandelion Void from various trailers, early creator previews, like the ones that I did myself on the channel earlier this year. But when are players going to be able to get their hands on Dandelion Void? Are there any public release dates at this time, or is that being kept under wraps at the moment?
So it's definitely the big question, and a totally understandable question for folks. I don't have something I can share at the moment, but I can say in a few months, stay tuned because we will have an announcement for something like that. And we're very excited to share that.
Okay, brilliant. I'll make a note in my diary, that's for sure. So along the similar lines, have you got any sneak peeks or new footage that you'd be happy to share with everybody watching today that I can put in the video when this goes up?
Yes, we have some final some art. It's more final for the Twig Snapper, which looks very different from what was in your last playthrough. It was very temp art, very programmer art. The Twig Snapper is this creature that is sort of in a little biome of its own, surrounded by these little flowers that you have to be careful not to step on. Otherwise, you might anger this larger creature that lurks among them. So I'll send those over to you to share with your audience. We've not shown this off before. So we're very, very excited for any feedback folks have, and excited about the direction we're going with it.
Yeah, I remember with the early experience, stop me if I've got the wrong creature here, but in the early experience, it was when you walked into the room, when you stepped on vines or flowers in the area, there was like this like violin shriek noise, and it just twisted its antenna to face at you. And if you did that three times, it just charged at you. And that was really intense and something I definitely wasn't expecting. But it's really, really nice to see some variety in the enemy types that we're facing. And I think that's one thing that I actually like, that Dandelion Void isn't just a zombie game. It's going to give so much more opportunity to create these unique creatures. And we see a lot of them in Dandelion Void already, even in the pre-alpha builds.
I'm glad you're excited about that. It's so funny. The sort of origin of the plant enemies is, working on it. I was like, well, I know I want it overgrown. I want some hostiles. What are they? I think it's another case of like, let's lean into the setting. What can this setting do that others can't? Have weird plant creatures is one of them. And I think we can explore a lot of, even I think people that crave a certain zombie-like experience, I think can find some fun in the sort of creatures and unexpected hostile enemies that we have in our game. I would say if you're into horror, this can turn up the dial because you don't even know what can hunt you in this game. When you're surrounded by plants.
On that note, just a bit of an impromptu question. I appreciate you might not be ready to answer this just yet, but are we likely to see any other hostile entities in the Pergola other than the plant life? So, for example, off the top of my head, are we likely to see hostile humans, for example, or anything of that nature?
So we're focused on, especially with multiplayer, providing our own hostile sort of humanoids in the form of other players. We're interested in amping up the more creative parts of the setting. So we're focusing less on humans as hostiles, and
Mhm.
exploring other things like especially since our setting is inspired by sort of like early mid-century weird sci-fi. One thing we want to explore is, okay, the plants have evolved and changed on the Pergola. Well, what happened to some of the sort of unintended passengers in the form of the rats that have infested the ship prior to its launch? So the rats are not quite your normal breed of rats. And I think that provides an interesting opportunity. If people are looking for neutral or potentially, I mean, the rats are maybe standoffish and maybe need to be convinced that you're not a threat. But there is a path towards developing some form of relationship with the rats aboard the Pergola. I don't want to ruin too much, but I would definitely say don't piss off the rats. You might regret it.
Amazing. Thank you very
Yeah.
much for the insight into that. I think that just about brings me to the end of the questions that I have about Dandelion Void. Now, before I ask our final question, I do just want to remind everybody that's watching this, if you have any questions at all about the game, please do drop them in the comments of this video, because I am sure that I can ask Brian very nicely to keep an eye on those comments and answer some of those questions from you guys. And obviously, I can use my experience with the game to answer a few of them too. But do you have any closing messages that you'd like to pass along to the community today before we wrap up this interview?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest one is to, folks like yourself and others watching this. It means a lot how much love we've gotten through Steam and on Reddit and people wishlisting. We've got more than 100,000 wish lists from folks who are interested in playing our game. And that really made it possible for us to look at this game and say we can pull in some people and work on making this all that it can be, the best it can be. Keep following along, keep commenting. We have devlogs every other week on our Steam page where we show updates on our progress. We've got a Discord. Wherever you want to find us, we're happy to share our progress, and just love that love.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Brian. Again, those of you that are watching this that are interested in Dandelion Void, you can find it on Steam if you want to wishlist it, and I will leave a link to the Steam page and to Dandelion Void's Discord down in the description to make that easy for you guys. Thank you, Brian. It was lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much.